Happy holidays, my hungering slaughter beast. It's me, Man Sant, and of course, before we jump into today's video, if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button as we make our way to 1,000 subscribers, which is just fantastic because really the whole point of this channel is to expand the love of Flesh and Blood, and I think that's something that we're achieving right now. So just big shout out to everyone who's liked, watched, subscribed, left comments. It means a lot. So with that, let's jump into today's video. So when we look at Chane as an opponent, this is a character that has gotten really strong with the release of Duskblade. Now he was already really strong, as we saw in the Monarch format, even warranting a ban on Seeds of Agony. But that was actually a decent matchup for Levia still, because Chane was a hero that took a little bit to ramp up into the game. And that was strong for Levia because she could just have 1 or 2 turns of heavy blocking and then really put on the pressure right like a turn or 2 before Chane could start matching that pressure with his amount of soul shackles. However, Chane now actually has early game plays that he wants to go for and that provide exponential threat as the game goes on. And that is because of Duskblade. So Duskblade is a card here that gains a +1 counter when he swings with it after he's played a non-attack and an attack in his turn. And this is something that gets easier for Chane to do as he grows effectively a larger hand size every time he makes a soul shackle. So his ability to consistently grow this Duskblade is so overwhelmingly consistent and so threatening that it really disrupts how Levia wants to be blocking heroes. Chane is going to get stronger now as the game goes on, but also demand blocks because it really is overwhelmingly consistent damage with this Duskblade, growing to as big as, like 5 on turn 3. So it's very hard these days to actually play this matchup. You have to get pretty lucky because your deck is just less consistent than Chane's is these days, and the damage you deal is also less consistent because it's not based around your weapons, where he is a weapon-based hero, and all he has to do is grow Duskblade, and he has the win con right there. You are hard-pressed to really force him to mess up his ability to gain Duskblade counters as well. He either has to get really unlucky himself, because your ability to really present damage is completely hindered by his Carrion Husk. Now, we love this card in Levia, but in Chane, it protects that strategy of growing Duskblade, whereas for us, as Levia players, we're just going to use it when it makes the most sense. Chane is going to use it specifically to protect his Duskblade game plan, and that's actually just a lot more value than what you can really gain out of it. And the games tend to be shorter in Blitz as well, to the point where he's only going to take like maybe 2 or 3 damage from the blood debt that Carrion Husk has, which is really not a big deal if he just wins the game, right? The other card that is really hard into you is Invert Existence. And this card in Blitz is so devastating because you normally have to be very precise about when you start going aggressive into Chane, and your graveyard is probably going to be slight because you can't just take all the time you want blocking early game and building up to a mid game because of the Duskblade threat. So you have to start attacking pretty early in the matchup to try to beat him down to the point where you can hopefully win off of finding a Blood Rush. But Invert Existence can mess this up because of its ability to clear out your graveyard. He can either push Blood Debt stuff into your Banish Zone to make you take Blood Debt really early in the game when you weren't trying to turn it off yet, or he can just clear out your graveyard of 6s, where all of a sudden, when you want to play an Endless Maw or Dread Screamer, you're just going to miss. You have no way to turn off Blood Debt, and it just is horrible. So this card really messes with you, and I hate to see it, even if it just sits there in the Banish Zone. It's such a threat that you just have to sweat and stress over. Really unfun card to play against, absolute killjoy of a card into Levia. So what can you do as the Levia player? Unfortunately, the strategy here is nothing crazy. It's really draw dependent as to how much you're going to have a game into this kind of Duskblade Chane. And that is really if you draw your early game pieces like Deadwood Rumbler or your Barraging Beatdowns, those cards are really going to help you have an aggressive enough early game that you can hopefully maintain enough momentum, enough of a threat, that by the time you find your first Blood Rush, if you've set up an Arsenal card, it will be enough damage to push him truly on the back foot to the point where he uses Husk, perhaps doesn't have enough resources to play out everything that he banishes, and then truly takes an effective turn of Blood Debt damage. And as soon as he's taken one of those turns, you normally can just pivot your game plan now to surviving and letting him die to his own Blood Debt. Now, you just can't do that very consistently. It's very draw dependent, like I said. So let's just kind of jump into the best of 3 and see how this series went. Welcome to the gameplay of today's video. On the left, we have Ben, who's a newcomer to the YouTube channel here, but he is a dear friend of mine, local player, who's actually a die-hard Chane fan as well. So I was happy that he had some free time so that we could go ahead and get this recorded. Now, we did roll off, and I did win the die roll. And that is very important in this matchup because if you let Chane go first, you're really just asking to be behind. Not only did they get the Soul Shackle off, they also get the Dustblade counter and likely an Arsenal. And that is just a recipe for disaster, especially if you're a Levia with a poor start. So in my shoes here, going first, I don't have anything that's immediately playable. I do have some good Arsenal targets, but I do want to roll to go ahead and try to swing double weapons here. Because I've already got something I want in Arsenal, so if I roll a 1, it's really not a huge deal. And sure enough, the 1 there means all I'm going to do is put that Boneyard Marauder in Arsenal and say go. And I do choose Boneyard over the Endless Maw here because the Boneyard Marauder is better when I draw into Blood Rush turns. And in this matchup, Blood Rush is really, really important. You need that card to try to flip the game through Husk and still present a ton of damage. And threaten the fact that Chane needs to keep some cards to keep building up Dustblade. Otherwise, he loses his threat entirely. So I'm putting Boneyard there because, right, if you start Blood Rush with the blue and then draw into another blue, you're guaranteed 18 damage off that card. So that's the plan there. Of course, you might not draw into the Blood Rush at all. And actually, I'm getting a little bit punished here as well with my I guess, inability to just dump anything from hand on that turn 1. If you have no cards that are instantly burnable in grave, then you basically just don't ever get a turn 2 attack off unless you lose Arsenal. Because, right, you're going to need to put 3 cards in grave and you have been at 0. You'll need to pitch something and then you'll need to play something. So I'm just, accepting the fact that I just won't get an attack off here because if I did, I'd be losing my Boneyard, and that's just not quite worth it because it's part of my win con. So as we see the hand that I drew into here, this is kind of the point where I need to keep something to be mildly aggressive, because if I just take another full turn of blocking out here, I've now really put myself to the point where Dustblade is just a disgusting high value card. Once Dustblade gets up to 4 damage for just that 1 resource, you are just going to be hard pressed to ever find your way back into the game if you're doing nothing other than blocking out, because that's when the threat is already just nuts. So with this hand here, unfortunately, it's really just not the most threatening either. I've got a blue Dread Screamer, I've got the red Hungering, I've got the blue Deadwood, and a red Barraging Beatdown. And that does mean a pretty decent hand would just be keeping the Barraging and a blue, or keeping the Hungering and a blue, but that's nothing crazy. That's just 7 damage, which is not going to threaten really anything for a Chane with how tanky they can be, and the fact that I didn't chip any damage early in the game. So this is not the great aggressive return that I would have hoped, and we'll see how this plays out, because as we go here, I'm just trying to stop the bleed of damage so that Husk isn't necessarily threatened. Next turn, perhaps turn after next, could work out in my favor. So with the hand I decided to keep, I did keep the Barraging Beatdown and the one of the blues. And that's because in theory, it is the most damage hand if I do roll Scabskins and get rewarded on the 1 action point. I wouldn't have been able to play Hungering into the Boneyard because I wouldn't have enough cards in Arsenal, but I can play the Boneyard and the Barraging with a Claw Swing. And that's the kind of damage I need now to either threaten Husk this turn or threaten cards out of his hand before Ben can grow this Soul Shackle and Dustblade threat too high. So I do make the call deciding here that it is worth going for this pressure play because in theory, it's going to be 13 damage if he doesn't decide to interact with it. But, of course he will. So luckily was rewarded with the Scabskins roll, got that extra action point. If I hadn't, then it, just would have been a 7 damage turn, and I would have just accepted the fact that I probably would lose Husk next turn because my threat just isn't big enough. So with that Boneyard, of course, now I get to weave in the Barraging and the Mandible. And this is part of that plan, right, where I want to make sure that I break Husk as early as possible, because this is only it's turn 3 right now, because I did have to skip a turn, unfortunately, so it's actually not necessarily as early in the game as I hoped, but if I can make him use Husk before I commit mine, then it puts me in a position where I feel like I'm in better control of the game, because I'm already committed to turning off Blood Debt, so I won't be taking the Husk Trickle, and yet he will, and we're gonna match Husk trades most likely, and in theory it's gonna actually have dealt him, damage, where it won't have dealt me any. So going into this turn, I know I'm very behind on just by the fact that his Duskblade is now going to be threatening 1 resource for 5 damage, which is, that is just so powerful. The other issue here with the hand I drew is that I drew Blood Rush, and yet I just used my Boneyard Marauder. I made the call to try to crack Husk over maintaining my setup for Blood Rush, because one thing is board state dependent, one is draw dependent. So the more consistent play is to disrupt board state, not just be draw dependent. But I am punished there by not keeping the Boneyard Marauder in Arsenal. My Blood Rush is likely just not going to land the way I want it to. Now, I do have the Eye of Ophidia, so that does open up my ability to actually play the Blood Rush blind, because I'm hoping that I can actually craft my draws a bit and find something decent. So normally I always like waiting on this, but the other cards in hand just really didn't open up any other line anyway for me to just play the Wrecker and Arsenal Blood Rush. That wouldn't have worked, because of course you have to discard for Wrecker, and if I just swing Mandible Claws, I'm taking 3 to Blood Debt, and that is just going to put me too far behind, because me taking 3 Blood Debt in this kind of matchup is no bueno. You don't want to lose life like that. So with the Blood Rush, I saw a Beast Within and a Convulsions, or rather with the Eye of Ophidia on the Blood Rush, and neither of those are good enough, so I bottomed them in the hopes that I find even just an attack. Any attack that turns off Blood Debt here is what I'm looking for. So I dug 4 cards in total, but saw 0. So all I get to do here is lead with Mandible Claws, follow up with another Mandible Claws, and of course I could have gotten really lucky and drawn into that other Boneyard Marauder, but I'm not going to rely on plays like that. I probably was just going to be happy with a Claw into an attack this turn, but not the case. So not only did I lose out on basically 3 damage difference by not having an attack compared to a Mandible Claw, I also took 3 damage. So this is really a big hit in my game plan. I'm losing the consistency that I need to compete in this matchup. And, it's not necessarily favored to begin with. My deck's just not as consistent as a Chane that grows their hand. But we do what we can. Now, Ben here is coming in with his just consistent game plan of playing a non-attack and an attack, and then growing that Duskblade. There's also some glare, so I do apologize, but he did banish the Invert Existence. I don't know if I mentioned that yet. And that Invert Existence is just sitting there threatening the fact that he can at any point now banish it and deal me 2 damage. So I'm really not happy with the state of this game, because look at Duskblade. It is going to be coming in for 7 this turn. 7. It's going to cost him 1 resource to swing 7. And I have to keep cards because I have to turn off Blood Debt. So you see the issue here in that the game just starts getting out of control so fast, and the threat that Chane has gets so large so quickly that it really disrupts how Levia doesn't really have the ability to block super heavy late game. So nothing's going well. And my arsenal's not great either, because it's just what I had left after that Blood Rush turn, and it is a Reckless Swing, which in theory can cheese the victory here, but I'm really not in a position to ever get him down to 2 life, and he has enough equipment pieces here that he's a smart player. He's not going to let himself get down to 2 anyway. So I'm very much in a tough spot here. And I'm looking at my hand, trying to decide the best line. And I do have a Ghostly Visit and a Dread Screamer and a blue, and the Writhing Beast Hulk. So the idea could have been to just block with one of the blues so that I am able to play Writhing Beast Hulk, rolling Scab Skins to try to also play the Ghostly Visit for 10 damage, and that is the most amount of threat my hand could have had, but of course it's a little reliant on luck there on the Scab Skins roll, and I really think that is the line I should have gone with here because I'm likely not ever getting a chance to roll Scab Skins again anyway in this matchup with how far behind I am. But I decided to take the safe route of just playing the Blue Dread Screamer into the Ghostly Visit without having to roll Scabs. But I lose 2 damage by doing it this way. And that 2 damage is a big deal because my win con, right, is to try to just get him down to Reckless range, and then he takes the Reckless plus Blood Debt and just dies unexpectedly. So I'm really not playing to my out here. I think this was a big mistake. But of course, there's no like guarantee that if I rolled Scabs, it even would have hit the 2 action points. So, safe line, I guess. So here we go, coming in for just 8 total on this turn. But this is a defensive chain list. Shout out to Hometown TCG for the list here. And so defense reactions just help shore up all of these breakpoints, and I'm just not going to really leak anything. I leak 2 damage, big whoop. Really nothing going on for me here. I don't take Blood Debt, so that's nice. I've got the Howl set up, but I will probably never have enough resources available to me at the start of my turn to really make use of it. So now we see another Blood Rush hand, but it's just getting incredibly awkward for me because I have that Reckless in Arsenal, not an attack. Plus, I'm so tight on life with his Dustblade coming in for... Oh, sorry. Dustblade was coming in for 6 last turn. Now it's coming in for 7. And when a card for 1 resource comes in for 7, and you're this hard pressed to block and still play an attack and turn off Blood Debt, I mean, it just almost never works out. So sure enough, with this hand here, I have a Blue Deadwood, I've got the Blood Rush Bellows, I've got a Sigil of Solace, and then another card here. I don't quite see it. So this is pretty much the last turn of the game here. Something has to go really wrong for Ben for me to have a chance. And the other just looming threat is the free 2 damage that he has with the Invert Existence. Although actually, I'm not quite sure if it's live. I do believe there's like a barraging in Graveyard here that would give him the 2 targets he needs to deal me 2 damage. So my thought in blocking this is maybe if he only has a red, I can bait him into not actually swinging with Dustblade. It's not going to lose counters because he still played a non-attack and attack, but perhaps I can bait him into thinking he has lethal right now and going for Invert, where I have the Sigil and I'll be able to play around it and still keep 3 cards. But Ben is too smart for that. He instead goes ahead, swings the Dustblade, because he can just end the game with Invert on my turn here anyway. So that's what we're going to see play out. He does swing. I do have to block with cards in hand, and I just have no way to turn off Blood Debt now. All I have is the Blue Deadwood and the Sigil. So even if I try to Sigil, which wouldn't actually do anything because I have 5 Blood Debt, he can just respond with Invert, and it kills me first anyway. So that's what we're just talking through here. I have no line that keeps me in this game, and it's just crazy. We see the Dustblade at 7. And this was even a game where I found Blood Rush. I mean, it wasn't great by any means, but that was my bad. So we take it to game 2 here. Ben, sure enough, did get that victory. So I still get to choose first or second. And of course, I will choose first again. But I'm not drawing anything too amazing first turn. This is definitely better than last game. A blue barraging will at least let me get something in graveyard to be able to have a decent 2-card hand on the flip here if I decide to block with 2 cards. So that's what I'm trying to set up for here. I am choosing to this game Arsenal my Endless Maw on the first turn instead of the Boneyard Marauder. Last game I chose the Boneyard Marauder because it was my out for Blood Rush, but now I'm recognizing I actually will have a card in graveyard. If I have the Endless Maw set up in Arsenal and then draw a new hand of 4, I can block with 2 cards, keep an attack to put back in Arsenal, keep a blue to pitch to swing Endless Maw, and I will stay in the game to that degree. So that's the line I'm going for here. Of course, it doesn't actually work that well if I draw immediately into a Blood Rush hand right here, because Endless Maw tends to be a little bit too expensive for Blood Rush. You have to get really lucky drawing blues. And what did I say? I straight up just draw. I just draw a Blood Rush turn. So, it's not like I'm not going to go for it. I definitely should. It's early enough in the game that perhaps I can make Ben whiff on a Duskblade trigger already, or use Husk really early as my turn 2. So that's what I'm watching for here, because I do have the blue Deadwood to get started on the Blood Rush, the blue Convulsions to get started on the Blood Rush, with a red Deadwood and a yellow Hungering. So there's the option here to potentially keep the entire 4 cards into Blood Rush and try to increase my odds of keeping resources available to me. If I discard the red Deadwood, then I keep the yellow, right, which is a guaranteed claw swing. Or I can go ahead and block with the Hungering Slaughter Beast, but then I'm really relying on drawing 2 blues because I know I have the Endless Maw in Arsenal, and that's not a cheap card. So as Ben plays out his turn, trying to block smart here by taking the 3 on the Blittle. It's not a big deal on any threshold, and it does turn on my Skullcap. And because I'm trying to keep my hand here, turning on Skullcap is very relevant because it enables more block without me committing cards. So that's what we see here. He's coming in with Enlightened Strike, and he decided to draw a card because if we look at his hand, he's actually short a good non-attack to play. He's got that Minnowism, but it's not going to do anything other than enable the Duskblade, so he can go for that line. And looks like that is what he's electing to do here. The cool thing about a Chane drawing a little bit clunky in the early games like this is that they tend to lose their arsenal because they are just card hungry anyway. To play non-attacks, to pitch, to play an attack, to swing Duskblade, and yada yada. We're normally looking at 3 cards minimum. So if they've blocked at all, then they miss their arsenal. Or if they have weird resource counts, then they also miss their arsenal. So that's what's happening with Ben here. So this is at least for me looking a little bit favorable. And I get to just go ahead, chuck my equipment in here to make sure I'm not under threat of losing Husk. Then we go into that Blood Rush turn I was talking about. So you'll notice in this matchup, I'm also running Arknight Skullcap instead of Hope Merchant's Hood, and that's because of how defensive you need to be against Chane's pressure. The Hope Merchant's Hood is great if you have breathing room, but you really have no breathing room in this matchup, so that's why I take the Skullcap. So Blood Rush there, already starting off a little bit poorly. I discarded the yellow, so now I'm really dependent on drawing any kind of resources, but I don't. I draw 2 reds with that red I had in hand to begin with. So yikes, now this just all starts to fall apart because that Arsenal card, once again, is a really expensive one with Endless Maw. So I can't even off 3 reds here still swing like Claws off the first blue pitch, Claws off 2 red pitch into Boneyard from Arsenal off the last red pitch, because that wasn't the Boneyard. On turn 1, I put the Endless, not the Boneyard. So it's unfortunate here. I don't get the big claw turn I want. I also elect to not just pitch my entire hand into swinging Endless Maw, because it would only be 3 more damage and I would lose my entire arsenal. So decide to hold back on that. I still get the Husk here from the Chane player, but I'm not feeling great because I now only have 1 more huge power card in my deck in that second Blood Rush. And I'm not likely to see it like back to back like that. So now my turns are going to be strung together with just like decent stuff. Like the Endless Maw I have in Arsenal is definitely more than decent. Off of 2 cards, the blue pitch and itself, it's going to swing in for 9, But that actually starts to look really lackluster when we see what Chane can start to do with even just like one more turn cycle here. Because right now his Duskblade is only going to come in for 4 most likely, but he tends to have off of basically 2-card hands because he gets to keep like a blue pitch plus like a non-attack, and then off the Soul Shackles he'll hit something. So I mean that kind of counts like an extra card. He can turn realistically 2 cards in hand plus something in banish into, at this point in the game, 8 damage. But pretty soon he's going to start matching my really good cards like Endless Maw and actually surpass them. Like next turn, that same play would equal 9 damage, then 10, then 11. So that's the kind of exponential threat that you just can't match as Levia, especially when you're through with one of your big power cards and having it just not land the way it should. So I'm absolutely terrified right now, but I am able to cover up that 4 attack Bounding Demigon with the Sink Below pretty evenly, so that's nice. But now he's coming in for that Rune Chant, which is going to plink me down to 14, meaning because I don't have any block left on my Skullcap or my Scab Skins, I actually am under threat of losing Husk right now. So I'm getting a little bit punished for using my equipment early, but I think it actually would have been the same result anyway. I covered up damage. It's not like I was inefficient about it. So then we look at this hand, and this hand is a Writhing Beasthulk, a red barraging beatdown, and a blue barraging beatdown. So I have options here of going ahead and blocking with 2 of the cards, the red barraging, red writhing, to then just swing in with Endless Maw for 9 and preserving Husk. But that does leave me open to potentially just never getting an arsenal again in the game. And with how tight life is right now, I really don't want to lose my arsenal advantage. So I'm okay losing Husk because there's no guarantee that it actually would get great value next turn anyway. Right then it covered up 4, and next turn it would at minimum cover up 5 on the Duskblade. But like I said, I would lose my arsenal, so not entirely sure if that's worth it. So now I'm just going to go for the barraging plus writhing play, coming in for 10 dominate. And this is like okay. What it does here is just stretch my arsenal threat a little bit. It is nothing that Ben can't just like shrug off here. You know, it's not presenting lethal. He can still keep a massive hand, and now his Duskblade's going to be swinging in for 5 next turn, plus not to mention what he hits on the Soul Shackles. So this is by no means like looking great for me, but it is at least a play to provide some kind of threat still and trade evenly enough that hopefully I find another hand that is going to let me block with 2 and then play the Endless and reset something in Arsenal here. That would be ideal. So I do draw into a Blood Rush hand here. So this is looking promising now because I do have a Arsenal card still. It is that Endless Maw once again. But the only problem now is I don't have the blue to kick off the Blood Rush. I only have the yellow, Hungering Slaughterbeast, plus a red Dread Screamer and the red Howl from Beyond. So obviously I need to block with the Howl from Beyond, and then lead the Blood Rush by pitching the yellow Hungering Slaughterbeast. So it's already going to be a little bit inefficient this turn because I'm only blocking with a 2-block, not a 3-block into this. I'm going to be pitching a yellow, not a blue into this. But there's the chance that I could get really lucky, draw 2 blues off the top with that Blood Rush, and then just be completely back into the game, because that would do it, right? I'd be left with 1 floating, and then I'd draw 2 more blues, which would be a total of 6 pitch. I need 4 pitch for the Mandible Claws, and then 3 pitch for the Endless Maw. And so that actually would equal the 7 I need total. So that's what I'm going for there. I can get lucky. I can get what I need. But it's by no means like super likely, but we'll just hope and pray. So then by playing the Blood Rush here, like I said, we'll see what I draw. Looks like I hit 1 blue with that Deadwood Rumbler, but then the other is just a red, which is very lackluster. I mean, I'm gonna use them all anyway. It's not the worst in the world. This at least is a claw into the Endless Maw, but it's not the ceiling that I was hoping for. Not that amazing burst of damage. I mean, it'll be, what, 16 damage total, which is good, but nothing that Ben can't block down with, like, at least 2 cards, right, plus his equipment, is guaranteed just not lethal. So I'm not necessarily getting the huge advantage I wanted. He's going to, for sure, be able to just keep at least 2 cards, the Arsenal card and a card in hand, plus at least the Bounding that he already has in the Banish Zone, and that Duskblade that at minimum is still going to swing for 5 this turn, if not actually grow to 6. So I'm not feeling amazing about this at all, especially because I lose Arsenal now, and we're looking at a turn from Ben that is still going to be very threatening. So with my equipment gone, there's really not a free pivot turn left for me here. So I'm just not looking too great in this spot. Now, the one thing that can happen is Ben can die to Blood Debt, which of course I'd love for that to happen. I mean, he could also die to my Reckless Swing if I draw it, but not going to rely on those kinds of situations. We'll just see what I draw here. So it looks like Sigil, the Endless Maw, a blue Wrecker, and a blue Convulsions. So Ben does have 3 cards with Blood Debt, so he has to at minimum play 2 of them out. He's going to go ahead, play that Howl, Soul Shackle, and then play the Bounding. So this is actually kind of a cute play, because Duskblade won't lose its counters if you don't swing. It will lose its counters if you don't play the non-attack and attack. So it's going to maintain its counters, and yet he still gets to swing for a little bit here. That does come in for just, looks like 5 on that attack. I took 2 down to 3. And then he does get to Invert Existence. And that Invert Existence, this is what I mentioned in the beginning, where now he's cleared out my graveyard, and I am really, really screwed from this. I now have only 1 card in graveyard, because I've had to match tempo. I've had to just play out my graveyard to get attacks through. But now I only have the 1 left. I have the Sigil in hand, so that at least can fill it to 2, but the only other way to immediately get a card in grave is to break the Gambler's Gloves. So that's what I'm talking through here with Ben, is that I actually really, really just need to burn Gamblers no matter what the roll is, so I'm hoping to get lucky, but would you know it, I roll a 1, pop Gamblers, feels okay, into a freaking 1. So, sure, puts me at 3 cards in grave, but now I have no action point, and I lose the game. So, it's kind of sad too, because this was looking okay in the end, because he's at 1 and has the Carrion Husk. So, Carrion Husk would have lethaled him on his next turn, and I actually would have had 6 life there, because I can play the Sigils to get up to 6. So, he'd be hard-pressed to full block the 9 of Endless Maw, and keep enough cards to over-lethal me through 4 cards and 6 life.
That's not